All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us here tonight. Hola a todos, muchas gracias por estar aquí esta tarde con nosotros. We want to welcome you to the Truth Act Forum Teach Out. Los quiero bienvenir aquí a la Ley, ¿Verdad? Foro Seminario que vamos a estar presentando el día de hoy. Before we start, I do want to go ahead and give the floor to Naira, one of our interpreters. Antes de comenzar, nomás quiero darle ahorita el espacio a Naira, que va a ser una de las intérpretes, de que va a estar explicando cómo funciona todo para el foro el día de hoy. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Lupita. Buenas noches a todas. Voy a dar este mensaje en inglés y en español. Thank you, Lupita, and good evening to everyone. I'll be sharing this message in English and Spanish as well. Mi nombre es Naira y estoy aquí con mi colega Elis y juntos seremos sus intérpretes para la sesión de hoy. My name is Naira, and I'm here with one of my colleagues, and together we will be your interpreters for today's session. The ICE Out of Ventura Coalition values language justice and making sure that everyone in our community is able to access and participate in these important conversations. So this meeting and session will be held in both languages, meaning that people can share and ask their questions in Spanish or English as they prefer. So please listen closely to the following instructions to make sure that you can connect to an interpretation channel if you are not bilingual in both English and Spanish. La coalición de ICE fuera del condado de Ventura valora bastante los principios y valores de la justicia del lenguaje, asegurando que toda persona que participe en este espacio pueda acceder y comunicar sus opiniones en el idioma de su preferencia, ya sea inglés o español. Así que por favor preste atención a las siguientes instrucciones para conectarse a su canal de interpretación y así poder ser parte de la conversación de hoy. The interpretation feature is now activated, and I'm going to share my screen to help you see the instructions on how to connect to your language channel. Once again, if you are not bilingual in English and Spanish, you will need to select a language channel in order to fully interact with tonight's session. The interpretation feature can be found through the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom window. And you'll be able to click on that globe icon to be able to select the language of your choice if you are on a computer. If you are on a mobile device, you will see 3 dots on the bottom corner of your screen called the More menu. And you can click on these and again select the language of your choice. A reminder, if you're not bilingual in both English and Spanish, then you must select a language channel. If you are bilingual in both of these languages, then you don't have to select a language channel and you can listen to the original audio. La función de interpretación ya está activada. Si está conectado desde una computadora, verá aparecer un globo terráqueo en la parte inferior de su pantalla y podrá hacer clic ahí para acceder a un canal de interpretación. Y esto es si se conecta por una computadora. Y si se conecta por un teléfono o tableta, podrá ver un menú de 3 puntos en la esquina inferior de su pantalla. Es un menú que se llama el menú de More o de Más. Y de ahí le aparecerá la opción de interpretación de idiomas. Puede hacer clic ahí y de ahí seleccionar el idioma de su preferencia. Un recordatorio que si no es bilingüe en inglés y español, tendrá que seleccionar un canal de interpretación. Y si sí es bilingüe, habla ambos idiomas, entonces puede escuchar el audio original y no seleccionar un canal. Si en algún momento If at any point you have problems connecting to interpretation, please let us know through the chat so we can assist you directly. Si en algún momento tiene problemas accediendo a su canal de interpretación, por favor déjenos saber en medio del chat. And a reminder to speakers and presenters in this space to please speak at a moderate pace, to please leave your microphone on mute when you are not speaking, and especially be mindful of any numbers or statistics when you are sharing, to repeat them, to speak at a moderate pace so that we can capture everything that you are sharing. Un recordatorio para los presentadores y participantes de este espacio que por favor hablen a un paso moderado, especialmente cuando hablando de cifras o cualquier otros datos importantes. Y también, por favor, mantengan su micrófono en mudo cuando no estén hablando para evitar ruido de fondo. Otra vez, cualquier cosa, déjenos saber por el chat si necesita apoyo y ya podemos comenzar con la sesión de hoy. Once again, please let us know if you run into any issues via the chat, and we may now begin our session for today. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Naida. So everybody, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure having you all at the ICE out of Ventura County Coalition's Teach Out. This is in preparation for the 2024 Truth Act Forum. So my name is Guadalupe Hasso. I go by Lupita, and I'm a community organizer with Buen Vecino, and tonight I will be your moderator. Just a brief background of what the coalition is and what it stands for. ICE out of Ventura County is a grassroots coalition of organizations and individuals who recognize and celebrate that immigrants are valued. They're essential community members whose presence makes our county a better place for all of us to live. We believe families who call Ventura County home have the right to stay together and to be safe and free from the vicious threats of detention and deportation. We have a common goal of ending voluntary cooperation by the Ventura County Sheriff's Office with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is ICE. More than 20 organizations across the county are members of ICE out of Ventura County. So if you're with an organization that is in solidarity with our cause and you have not yet joined our coalition and you would like to join us, please get in contact with us and we will help you get the steps in so you guys can be with our coalition as well. So today we are calling on friends and supporters to take action to defend our immigrant community. We invite you to join us at the Truth Act Forum, which will be held on October 29th. The Truth Act Forum's purpose is to provide the public with transparency to our Sheriff's Office entanglement with ICE and to receive public comments. So tonight's teach out, we're going to explain the Truth Acts, how the Sheriff's Office collaborates with ICE, the impacts, and preparing public comments. We are recording the session in English and Spanish, just as a reminder. So for the people that could not make it tonight, they can watch it later. So before we get started, our presenters tonight are Jehan Lehner, who is a staff attorney at the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. And we also have Bruno Huizar, Detention and Deportation Policy Supervising Manager at the California Immigrant Policy Center. I do want to point out something very quickly. I think some of you may have already noticed, maybe similar to other webinars that you all have registered to in the past. We don't really tonight allow for much interaction between the viewers, just because we may not all know each other, and we do want to create a safe space for everybody. If they want to ask their questions, they can do so in a comfortable and safe space. For that reason as well, we don't have the cameras enabled to our viewers, so that's why they're not turning on for you guys. But what we do have is a chat that's available for any questions that you will have during our presentations, and that we will be more than happy to answer those once our presenters are done presenting. So we welcome the questions in English. We welcome the questions in Spanish. So if you have a question that you want to ask in Spanish, please type it in Spanish. I will read it in Spanish and we will answer it as well. But yeah, please ask it in your preferred language. That is no issue at all. Okay. So yeah, Jehan and Bruno, on behalf of ICE out of Ventura County, we want to thank you both for being here tonight and for preparing your presentations. So first up, we do have Jehan, and you can take it from here.
Thank you, everyone, and I'm so excited to be here for this teach out today. So I have the honor of explaining the legal aspects today. So my slides are going to be first in Spanish for 30 seconds, but then I will be speaking in English. And then the slide will switch over to an English slide, and that's to help with the language justice that we're having today. So my words will be in English. For the first 30 seconds, you'll see a slide in Spanish. And today I'll be covering the legal aspects, and I will also be covering what is actually happening here in Ventura County. So going through our agenda today, first we're going to talk about local ICE enforcement and how that works. How does ICE actually get information of folks that live in our area? Then what does the sheriff here in Ventura County actually do to collaborate with ICE? Then we'll cover what protections we have in the state of California against ICE. And then we'll talk more about what the sheriff has reported for this year, what he's going to report for the Truth Act, and then the recommendations we have. So I'm really setting up the background for what Bruno's going to talk about, which is how we as a community will take all of this together, what's going on in Ventura County, and communicate this to the Board of Supervisors during the Truth Act. So thank you for letting me do this background. So first, we're going to start with how ICE enforcement and local law enforcement collaborate in general together, not just in Ventura County, but overall. So first, we're going to cover what is sometimes known as ICE detainers, but it's really covering the whole aspect of any type of request that ICE makes to local law enforcement, asking local law enforcement to give them information about a non-citizen in their custody. So traditionally, or the first way that this came into place was called ICE holds. So basically, ICE was asking local law enforcement agencies to hold a person for a longer time than they would otherwise be processed out of the jail. So maybe the person was arrested and charged, but then got bailed out before their trial. Or maybe they were arrested and not charged, so they were going to get released. And normally what would happen is whenever the sheriff can no longer hold you, you're supposed to get released. But then ICE would ask actually for, can you hold on to them, sheriff? Can you hold on to them for 2 days so that we have a chance to get over there and pick them up? And then if the local law enforcement decides to honor the detainer, then ICE had that extra time to come pick them up. Now in California, and we'll talk about this in some of the state protections later, those detainers have been determined to be illegal. It's been determined that it's a violation of someone's constitutional rights if they're being held for extra time when they don't have any charges or when they were supposed to be released. But ICE still tries to get around this with other methods, which are called notifications of release or handoffs or transfers. And these do still exist in California under certain circumstances, and we'll talk more about those circumstances. But for now, what you need to know, what is a notification? It's using the same form that you see on the slide, but instead of asking them to hold for extra time, they just say, ICE says, can you please let us know when you're going to release the person? Don't hold them for extra time. We know that you can't do that, but will you notify us? And then with that notification, ICE can show up and wait for the person outside when they're being released. Or they can also ask for a transfer. And a transfer is where ICE shows up to the jail, and the sheriff actually transfers the person straight into ICE custody. So the person doesn't actually get let outside. Sometimes they're inside and ICE also comes inside, or sometimes they're in a secure area of the facility and ICE comes and gets the person right away. And so why are we talking so much about police and ICE? Why does this matter? It's just because the number one way that people end up in ICE custody in what we call the interior, so not on a border arrest, is actually through these transfers from law enforcement agencies. So as you can see in this little graph, if we got rid of these transfers, we'd get rid of 70% of people getting arrested in our community. The other graphic that also represents when ICE goes to people's homes. But we know in reality, ICE doesn't spend the resources to always track down everybody. They really do rely on that local law enforcement. They really rely on our local resources going into these transfers, into these detainer and notification requests. And so how does this really work? There are a couple of programs that ICE uses for enforcement. One of them was known as Secure Communities, but in general, they all work the same. So what happens is when police arrest a person, they book the person and they scan the person's fingerprints. Once they scan those fingerprints, it automatically goes to the FBI and DHS databases. So it doesn't matter if there's a sanctuary ordinance or not, automatically fingerprints always get sent. And this is just policy. And so what happens on the back end is ICE agents will go through their database and see where there's a fingerprint hit. And why would there be a fingerprint hit? It could be something like this person has applied for an immigration benefit in the past, and so DHS had their fingerprints from their past application. It could be that this person was actually processed at the border and was fingerprinted, so ICE has their fingerprints as someone who might be a non-citizen that way. Or maybe that person went through immigration proceedings, ICE got their fingerprints that way. And so because they either got them through an immigration application, a border encounter, or an immigration court, they suspect, hey, that person that's fingerprints just came through the sheriff matched a non-citizen fingerprint that we have. And then they check, why is that person in the jail? So now they go and check, why did that person get arrested through the FBI rap sheet? And if they think it's something that is serious or a reason why they can deport that person, they go ahead and send a request to the law enforcement agencies. So they'll send a notification or a transfer request to our law enforcement agencies just through that fingerprints. And now the part we're worried about, or that we want to talk about, is whether or not our local law enforcement responds to those requests. So a takeaway here is those requests are going to happen automatically. They're happening because the federal government gets the fingerprints. And really what we can control in our locality is whether or not we voluntarily respond to those requests. There's no requirement that we respond. So what is our current sheriff doing here in Ventura County? So our sheriff in Ventura County is following what is known as the minimum of the law, or the floor of the law that is set by a sanctuary law in California known as SB 54. So that policy is the policy I was saying that allows for the sheriff to respond to certain transfer and certain notification requests by ICE when an individual falls into one of those categories in the carve-out. So let's go through some of the data. So our sheriff has said, I will respond based on the floor of SB 54. And then later we'll talk about what does SB 54 say, what are the types of transfers that he's making, but I just wanted to show some of the data of what our sheriff says. So this was from last year's Truth Act. I just wanted to show, and I'm not going to actually have a Spanish slide for this. This is just from last year's, but you can kind of see the trajectory where the people that he is responding to. So he's responding to, down here, this number, ICE pickups, or the inmate release notifications to ICE. They've gone up a little bit, those transfers in 2022. The notifications have gone up a lot. And so we're going to see that on a graphic just representation. So this is from last year's presentation. And you can see they went up a little bit. Now, this year, 2023. So the 2023 data, we don't have his presentation yet. So I showed you some slides from last year from the sheriff's presentation. But we do have the data that the sheriff did report to the California Attorney General. So he reported to his boss that the transfers have gone up to 43 people. So going back, transfers, which is known as ICE pickups, were 15. This year in 2023, it's up almost threefold from the year prior. So just a reminder, it's 2024 right now, but the Truth Act reports on the year prior. So we're looking at 2023 data, and that transfer data has gone up threefold. That's a huge red flag for us here at the coalition. And I will give a couple notes about this number, the 43 number. The way it's reported to the Attorney General's office is just by what charge they use to send it in, to what charge they use to figure out that this person fell within the carve-out, so was not protected by the Sanctuary California Ordinance. And so it could be possible that this number of actual transfers might be slightly lower. And that could be the case if maybe the person was charged with 2 crimes that were transferable to ICE. But I think it's going to be something around this 43% number, and that's a huge increase. So we really want to highlight that there's a big increase, and it's really important that you all are here tonight to figure out how we can all talk to the sheriff that this is not okay. This big, large increase is not okay with him voluntarily cooperating with ICE. And then just a quick word on the probation department. They are also bound by the sanctuary law in California. The parole department, which is the state prison parole, they are not bound, but we'll talk about probation because they are local and they are bound by the same state SB 54 law. Last year in the Truth Act forum, the probation department reported turning over no information to ICE. So the ICE Out of Ventura Coalition actually wanted to figure out a little bit more information about why they were reporting no longer turning anyone over. And so we did what's known as a Public Records Act request to the probation department. And we actually spoke to the head of the probation department, and they've actually updated their policy and told us that they are no longer collaborating with ICE. So I just wanted to highlight that because it can be done. It's already being done here in Ventura County. We have a whole agency that has decided that they shouldn't be turning over folks to ICE. And they actually, I believe it was 2 years ago, reported accidentally turning people over. So we know that mistakes happen, and their department has decided we're going to err on the side of caution and not turn anyone over. And so maybe you're wondering at this point, okay, well, what's the big deal with turning folks over to ICE? Or maybe you already know that it's a problem, but let's talk about what are the concerns with turning folks over to ICE. So some of the problems or concerns that we have fall into a legal bucket. But one concern that we have is actually one of the Bill of Rights known as the 10th Amendment reserves anything that is not outlined in the Constitution as being a federal government power. It's actually reserved to the states. And the 10th Amendment says that the federal government, so the federal government runs ICE, the federal government can't commandeer our local resources, can't take over our local police to do what they're supposed to be doing. So legally, we just kind of say it's running afoul of the 10th Amendment. And then we also have the 4th Amendment. And the 4th Amendment prohibits involuntary search and seizure. So like I said earlier, someone actually has to be charged for something in order to be held. Someone has to be criminally charged in order to be held in detention. And so to have somebody being criminally held in the sheriff's custody for a longer time, just so ICE can come get them, actually violates the 4th Amendment because they're being held in criminal custody longer than they should just so ICE can come pick them up. And really, we don't have great data on this, but we think even with notifications and transfers, they are likely holding people longer than they need to be held in order to facilitate the transfer and notification. So even if they're saying we're not detaining you for extra days, they probably are holding someone past the time that they deserve to be. And then I think probably more important than the legal issues that it causes are the problems for our communities. So one is that it just foments or creates more distrust between our immigrant communities and local authorities. And I think a lot of folks have given great testimony about this, especially when it comes to emergencies like wildfires or other emergencies, that because they hear that their sheriff is actually turning people over to ICE, if there's actually a broad emergency where the sheriff might be present, they're actually worried to even get normal resources that they're entitled to just by being residents of Ventura County. So it does create a really big problem. It often makes it so that the community views law enforcement and ICE as the same thing. And ICE actually does wear uniforms that say police oftentimes. So it really does create more entanglement and distrust. We also know that it makes folks afraid to actually report a crime when they're a victim of a crime, even if they themselves have legal immigration status. If they're from a mixed status family, they might be afraid to report a crime, afraid that if the police come over, they'll contact ICE. And then, of course, it also separates local families. So we have local families when one person maybe commits an error and serves their time and expects to get out, but then they're separated from their family. It just causes so much more destruction, the ripple effects that we feel throughout the community. And I know I'm definitely preaching to the choir, and you all could probably share such powerful stories of these effects in your own community. And lastly, this also opens up our local law enforcement to liability. So like I said, there's really complicated carve-outs where SB 54 won't protect you. And it's very easy to make mistakes on these. We do know of a situation already, at least one, where the Ventura County Sheriff did make a mistake and turned over someone incorrectly to ICE, and they were detained for more than 6 months. So it's improper detention. And that can open up our county to lawsuits and further waste of our county resources. And then we just wanted to show that this also conflicts with our sheriff's own statements that he's made publicly about his mission and his strategy and his vision for the county. And this is just more that you can put into your statement. So I'm just giving you more background. But our sheriff in Ventura, when he came into office, he really said that he wants to do policing in a manner that is unbiased, that is lawful, that displays empathy and respect and dignity for all individuals. And he said he wants to strengthen the bonds and the partnerships within our community. But like we said, if you're cooperating with ICE, an agency that is known to not follow the law, ICE itself is known to disregard people's rights. It's known to create very hostile detention conditions, very illegal detention conditions that they're being sued for. And if you are mixing yourself with them, you're obviously not being impartial. You're not really creating these relationships with the community. You're not respecting the dignity of all people, and you're treating people differently based on their race or the country that they're from. So if one person was born in the US, they get out after they've served their time. If they were not born in the US, you're going to use your resources to turn them over to ICE. And again, pointing out the sheriff's own words, Sheriff Freihoff's own words, he has these 7 pillars of policing. And I think also 4 of the 5 pillars really go to this. So pillar 3, he said when he came into office, I want to use evidence-based policing. So I want to make decisions based on evidence, based on like what it shows will actually lower crime. However, when we look at actually collaborating with ICE, there's no evidence that collaborating with ICE is actually creating safer communities. There's no evidence that a community that their police office or their sheriffs collaborate with ICE actually lowers the crime rate at all. He also says he wants to do community partnered policing, pillar 4 of his pillars. But again, the community, all of you here today are against his cooperation with ICE. It actually destroys the infrastructure we have within our own community when you're taking people and pulling them out of it. He also says in pillar 5 that he wants to engage with stakeholders. But many people here in this group can share how he has not taken our concerns into account when we talk to him about this. In Pillar 7, he talks about wanting to improve outcomes, for all residents living in Ventura County, while we know this current policy is discriminating and hurting the immigrants in Ventura County. And I'm so sorry, I forgot to switch to Spanish, so I'm gonna let this sit on this slide for a little bit, just to show the 4 pillars that I think actually really touch on this if you all want to bring it up in your comments. And then lastly, I did want to talk about how this does provide liability to the county of Ventura. So like I said, it's easy to make a mistake under what falls under an exception to SB 54, the California Sanctuary Law, or not. There are rules that are often not followed regarding what documents you're supposed to provide a non-citizen when ICE is looking for them. And we do know that in other counties, as you can see in this picture, Pedro was one of my clients in the past. San Francisco was actually ordered to pay him close to $200,000 because they violated the sanctuary city law there. And we know that there is also a violation in this county. So the sheriff is just opening our county up to more errors, more mistakes, more liability, where our county will actually end up paying money because of these errors. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about the protections that California has and how these exceptions work. This is more background for you all, so I just want to check how I'm doing on time. If people want me to go through this more quickly, feel free to chat me or come off mute. But these are the statutes that apply here in California that protect people against ICE collaboration. So the first statute we have is what I was calling SB 54. Its full name is the California Values Act. And this restricts a lot of cooperation between local law enforcement and ICE and other sharing of information of our California government to ICE. This one is what got rid of detainers in California. Then we also have the Trust Act. And this was the first law in the country that kind of restricted when you could cooperate with an ICE request. And so a lot of those carve-outs or exceptions I was talking about come out of the Trust Act law. And then we have the Truth Act. So the Truth Act is what actually allows us to have the forum that we're going to have later this month in Ventura, where we talk to the Board of Supervisors and tell them why we don't want the sheriff to be cooperating with ICE anymore. It also requires that the sheriff provide certain consent forms before anyone can be interviewed by ICE within the jail. And so let's go a little bit more into those Truth Act provisions. Forum. So if the sheriff does notify ICE about anyone, they do have to have a forum every year. But it also includes some rules about how ICE interviews can be conducted within the jail. So it allows the person that ICE is looking for to decline an interview, proceed with an attorney present, and they also do have to get copies of all those forms. And then we have the California Values Act. And what it does is it limits ICE's ability to arrest people in criminal custody by prohibiting notification and transfer requests unless those small exceptions do apply. And like we said, the transfer request is actually when ICE shows up to pick the person up right away. And a notification is when they just ask the sheriff, can you just let us know when the person is getting out of jail? And then this is a chart that kind of goes over more of what is prohibited under SB 54, the California Values Act. It prohibits all ICE holds, any arrest of, so a California police officer or sheriff can't just arrest somebody because they have an immigration hold. It also stops local law enforcement from entering into what are known as 287G agreements, which would have deputized our local police and sheriff to be kind of like immigration officers. It also prohibits asking about immigration status or using ICE agents as interpreters. So some of this stuff sounds really out there, but this used to happen. And it prohibits a lot of agencies in California from sharing personal information with ICE unless it's publicly available. Most notifications are, so notification of when a person is being released are prohibited unless there are certain exceptions met. And we'll talk about those exceptions in a second. And then again, transfers are prohibited with certain exceptions. And then there's just a couple of other prohibitions against local task force. So those would be task force where sheriffs cooperate with ICE agents to make criminal arrests, and also has those restrictions on interviews within the jail. One thing I will say about these exceptions is it doesn't apply to CDCR. So it doesn't apply to the prison system in California, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. So sometimes you'll mostly see people just being completely transferred within prison custody. And so I did tell you that we were going to talk about the exceptions. So what are those exceptions? So if you fall into some of these exceptions, it basically means that the sheriff, and the sheriff here, Freihoff, can notify ICE about your release time, or he could cooperate and have ICE come pick you up and be directly transferred. So what are these exceptions? Serious or violent state felonies, convictions. So these are a certain class of convictions that are listed in California state law. It used to track more on what strikes would have been, but there's some things that you wouldn't expect to fall under here. There's certain drug sale crimes that you might not really expect to lead to this carve out, but they do. So even though it says serious and violent, they're not always violent or what you would consider serious crimes that would land you into an exception. And then certain felonies that are designated in addition, if you've been convicted within the last 15 years, that is also a exception to the California Values Act. And so you could be notified or transferred by the sheriff into ICE custody. And a minor, so certain misdemeanors that are called wobblers. If you have a conviction for these wobbler offenses, and they're called that because they can be charged as a misdemeanor or as a felony. If you have a conviction for that within the last 5 years, you could also be notified or transferred to ICE. And then we also have, if you committed a felony while on release. So these are certain types of release programs like compassionate release you might have heard of. If you commit a felony while you're out, you could also be transferred to ICE. If you're a sex or arson registrant, current one, you could also be transferred or notified to ICE. And then certain federal offenses. So if there's an outstanding federal warrant or a federal offense, you could be transferred to ICE. So yeah, it's just, I think a lot of mistakes also happen here with these designated wobblers. So I talked a lot about mistakes, but like certain definitions have inconsistent wobbler language, so it's easy to make mistakes between them. But yeah, so those are the criminal exceptions. So I've basically given you kind of like the overview of everything that is going on in Ventura County and how this works in the landscape of ICE and California. And now I just want to leave you with what are some of our recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. And so we really want to recommend that the sheriff ends any collaboration with ICE. We want him to stop responding to any notification or transfers requests. It has been done before in this county and with the probation department, and it can be continued. These folks that are in sheriff custody, they've already been held to answer for any of their suspected criminal conduct or any sentence in the criminal realm. We don't need to be sharing our resources to help ICE, which is a very well-funded agency. So I'll stop sharing and transfer this over to Bruno. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jehan. I'm gonna share my screen. Can you all see this? Jehan, can you see my screen?
So sorry, yes. Sorry, I was zoned out for a second.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Bruno Wisad. I use they, them pronouns. I work at the California Immigrant Policy Center. And before that, I've been a community organizer supporting families and communities against detention and deportation in Los Angeles County, where I live. And so I'm going to go over a presentation on preparing public comments for the Truth Act Forum. Before I go into that, I want a little background on why we have Truth Act forums in the first place. So as you can see on this slide, there's a picture of Willie from Buen Vecino at the Board of Supervisors meeting last year, giving a public comment. So the Truth Act, as Jehan mentioned, was passed in 2016 and went into effect in 2017 in California. So a lot of the Truth Act forums started happening. Counties that are collaborating with ICE, colluding with ICE, have to have a Truth Act forum where they notify the community and the public on how many folks are transferred to ICE and details about that. So the goal for us as families, as community members, as neighbors, as advocates who are interested and committed to protecting our families and communities from ICE, our goal is to urge the sheriffs and the local elected officials to change their policies and stop helping, working, colluding with ICE. So there are some counties already that don't work with ICE because they passed a policy, whether it's administrative policy with their sheriff's department or through their board of supervisors. And so these counties, San Francisco, Alameda, Humboldt, Los Angeles, Contra Costa, Marin, Santa Clara, San Joaquin, San Mateo, have all passed policies to prevent ICE from prohibit their sheriff's departments from working with ICE. We would love to see this list grow all across the state. There's over 50 counties. There are some counties that have not transferred people to ICE, but there's still a chance that they will because there's no permanent policy. And as you can see on this slide here, there's a picture of an ICE out of California event. There are hundreds of organizations and thousands of people across the state that are working just like you all to prohibit ICE from working with their law enforcement to protect and defend their families and communities. So I wanted to make sure that this is great happening in Ventura County and it's happening across the state. So testimony. Testimony is one of the most important things. You'll hear Jehan and the lawyers are important and necessary for this movement. But you all are all necessary and important for this movement as well. You all who live, work, study in Ventura County, this is your opportunity to share your stories and your testimony on why you believe your sheriff, your county should stop colluding with ICE to separate our families. So the testimony is important. Some people, it can be scary, it can be nerve-wracking, it can be, oh, is this really worth it? Sharing my personal story out loud in the public, it can be scary, but there's power in that. When we share our stories individually and collectively, we move the people in power to make the decisions we need to protect our families and communities. So the goal for testimony is to educate our elected officials, build the power of the people, and secure support at the County Board of Supervisors. This photo here is taken from the North Bay Organizing Project in Sonoma, California. And this was their Truth Act Forum. You can see they're holding up some 8x11 paper signs, so no fancy posters, but really getting the message across. ICE, no, comunidad, sí. So community first, no more ICE in our communities. Your voice matters. That is really important, not only in the Truth Act Forum, but in every local issue that is happening in Ventura County. And the Board of Supervisors is really that space to share our concerns, our problems, and our solutions that we have, right? We all in this room have the solutions. Stop working with ICE, stop using our resources, money, spending it on collaborating with ICE to separate our families, We have the solutions. So your voice matters. Here's a few questions to help you all prepare for testimony. So how long have you lived in Ventura County? Do you have family or loved ones in Ventura County? Do you work, study, or worship in Ventura? Are you, your family, or your neighbors affected by ICE? This may seem like simple questions, but this is really important to uplift your story. I lived in Ventura County for 30, 40 years. I work here, I study here, I go to church or mosque or, with my faith group here in Ventura County, to really show that it's not just us as individuals giving that public comment, but we're part of a community at school, at work, in the churches and places of worship, and that you as the individual are sharing that story. You have a whole community behind you. And it's important to share how you individually or personally or your family is impacted by ICE. Ventura County, they'll look at the data, they'll look at the numbers, but the stories is what's really important and paints the whole picture, and how racist and violent ICE is in our communities, and how they make us less safe, living in constant fear, leaving our homes, going to school, going to work, going to the grocery store. And as we know, right, in the background of all of this, we hear the former president, Donald Trump, promising mass detention and deportation, specifically targeting California. So we know millions across our state and the country are living in fear of next month what could happen if Donald Trump is elected to be president. And so it's important that we share our stories and fight back at our local and counties to ensure that we defend and protect our families and communities. Here's a sample testimony. This is just to get your ideas going. You don't have to do it like this, but I think it's important. Some public comments is a minute or two or a couple minutes, so it can go by really quickly. So here's a sample. I'm not going to go through all of that. I'm actually going to role play a little bit and give you my public comment if I were at the Board of Supervisors right now. But write your name, your constituent, how long you've lived there, if you raised your family in Ventura, why prohibiting ICE from being in your community with the sheriff, from colluding with the sheriff, why that is important to you. That's really important to get our message across, that ICE does not keep our community safe and creates constant fear and distrust of any local authorities. So it goes beyond the sheriffs, the police, but our city agencies, where people will be scared to access city services that are rightfully ours, because we contribute to our city budget, our county budget, right? And when folks are scared of accessing city services, that has really negative outcomes. Some more sample, not going to read it all, but really just important messaging to get across. This is just suggestions for folks. Like I said, you don't have to reshare this verbatim, word from word, but really getting the message across. A minute or 2 minutes can go by really quickly. And so it can be challenging to really create a testimony, but hopefully some of these bullet points can help you get your ideas going. So some tips for testimony. On this picture here, we have a young person who just graduated college. She's undocumented. She took interviews in Sacramento at the state capitol, sharing her story with ABC 10, and it got aired on TV at 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock on the local news there, which is prime time for TV. So just some tips: share your personal story. We all have the power of our stories to move people. And it's really important that we share our stories and really say to our elected officials the impacts, the daily impacts of working with ICE. Like I mentioned, the data and the numbers that they're looking at, some of them will never understand what distrust, how distrust looks like, how fear looks like when our sheriffs is working with ICE. So it's up to us as individuals who are impacted by this to share those stories and tell our elected officials, this is what's going on. We've already lived this, and we've been living through this and continue to live through this until you take action and prevent ICE from working with the sheriffs. 1 to 2 minutes, it can go by really quickly. I mentioned it. Another tip is to write your personal story on paper or on your phone. It's really important. We all have a lot to say, but really writing it out, I think, can really help share what you want to say, what you're comfortable sharing, what you're not comfortable sharing, so you can practice before actually going to the board of supervisors and then giving your story or your testimony. Another tip, practice in the mirror with your friend, with your family, or record yourself. I do this all the time on my phone. I'll record myself before public comment at City Hall or at the Board of Supervisors, and I'll see if I'm under time, if I'm getting my message across, if I'm speaking too quickly. So that can really help. And then you can ask your friend or family, did that make sense? Did you get my message? Was I too quick? Did you understand me? Are you with me? And then they can, give you feedback on, oh, maybe you should focus a little more on this, or I didn't understand that acronym. Can you explain it? So it's important to practice with yourself or with a friend, colleague. And before I go there, I'm actually going to role play a little bit and give you my testimony. It is nerve-wracking, especially for those folks who haven't been to a Board of Supervisors meeting, or maybe you've been and you provide a testimony and it happened really quickly, so you may not remember what happened. But I'm going to give my own testimony to help encourage you to write down your testimony and share it in a couple of weeks at the Ventura County Truth Act Forum. So I'm going to go. My name is Bruno, and I'm a constituent and live in Los Angeles, Supervisor District 2. I have lived in Los Angeles for over 30 years in a mixed status family, where my family members can be at risk of detention and deportation by ICE on any given moment. Prohibiting the sheriffs from helping ICE and working with them is important to me, because when I was a teenager, I separated my family. My home was raided. My parent was arrested in front of us and our neighbors. My parent was locked up in an ICE facility far away from our family, and then deported to Mexico, where my parent hasn't been since he was a child. My family has been separated ever since. There are thousands of families across our city, county, and state who've been separated by ICE, and many more will be separated unless we pass a permanent policy to protect immigrant families and end the collaboration with ICE. I urge you to pass this policy to prevent our county property, personnel, and resources from being used for immigration enforcement and separating our families. Thank you for your time. And so I just role played a little bit. I can't see your faces. Hopefully that was helpful. I just shared a deeply personal story. I share this all the time when I'm at City Hall or the County Board of Supervisors or in front of a camera, a news crew. And it's important, right? Because our stories is our power, is our currency. Some of us don't got money, but we have our stories, right? And they cannot take that from us. And so additional talking points, as I shared in my testimony, prohibit our county funds from colluding with ICE. In LA, before we ended the transfers with the sheriffs, they were spending over $1 million of our tax dollars to separate our families. If that doesn't get you fired up, I don't know what will. I'm just kidding, but that's really a really important point. We want our county funds to go to schools, go to good jobs, healthcare, not working with ICE. Prohibiting communication with sheriffs and ICE. Jehan shared all the ways that ICE is communicating with our local sheriffs all across the state. Let's stop that. ICE has $1 billion budget. Why are they using our county resources and wasting them on separating our families? And lastly, protect our families from being separated by ICE in Ventura County. So this is important, right? We want to protect our families, protect children living in mixed status families, protect students going to school, protect workers from working. our neighbors, our churchgoers, right? We want to protect everyone in our county because when ICE comes in and works with our sheriff, families are separated. And so these are just some main talking points, right? Just like one sentence. What is that one sentence that will get that message across? And I'm going to end this presentation with the power of the people. As somebody who's been impacted and has my family separated, I lean on my community. I lean on my neighbors. I lean on my friends. Because as a teenager, my parent was separated and teared apart. And so I really found power in working with other like-minded people to ensure that we live in a city, in a county, in a state where no more families are separated. It's a big goal, but I believe we can get there. On this slide here, you'll see us in Sacramento at the Immigrant Day of Action this year in April. I believe Willie and some folks were there. It was wonderful. We had 500 folks across the state standing up for immigrant rights and families and protecting our families. And then on the right-hand side, you see the iSide of LA Coalition, similar to the iSide of Ventura County, where we were outside City Hall trying to pass a local sanctuary ordinance to provide permanent protections for families, for immigrant families, and stop our county from using the property, city workers, and resources from helping ICE separate our families. And so that's the end of my presentation. And gonna pass it back over to, I think, Lupita or Jehan.
Hello. Thank you, Bruno. Thank you, Jehan, for both of your presentations. And honestly, for all that you guys do for the coalition, it means a lot to us in our community. I want to also just thank you during your presentations. You both highlighted the things that really compelled the each and every reason that we're all here tonight. And, we're here for those that have been very traumatically affected and impacted. And we will continue to be here for those, so hopefully that this will come to an end. And we want to just stop this unnecessary involvement with ICE. So, as long as this is happening, we're going to be here. We're not going to go anywhere else. For that reason, I will keep reiterating the date, October 29. If you haven't done so already, mark it on your calendars. As Bruno mentioned earlier, there is strength in numbers. We need you. Our community needs you. So we hope to see you all there, and we will continue to be here at any moment. If anybody has questions, if you guys want to reach out to us, we are more than happy to continue assisting this, especially for those that plan to be there for the first time. We want to make sure we guide you and support you as much as possible so that you are not alone. So at this moment, I do want to invite you all to ask your questions. If you haven't done so already, I know we saw a few come directly to Jehan. So thank you, Jehan, for sharing those in the chat and for responding. If anybody else has received any questions directly as well, please feel free to share those in the chat as well. So I'll wait a little bit to see if any questions come in the meantime. So I'll give that a few seconds. Oh, and then I'll just read these out loud. It says, registration to speak at the Truth Act Forum will open on October 14th, which is, oh, that was yesterday. So it already opened. So those of you that want to speak can start registering. And then actually, I do have a question coming in right now from Rita. It's asking, can we attend via Zoom on the 29th if we can't attend in person? And then do we have an ICE meeting tomorrow for the coalition? And so to my understanding, you can attend this meeting via Zoom as well. So for those of you that cannot attend in person, and for those of you that want to make comments but can't do so in person, you can do it via Zoom. And then, sorry, there was a correction right here. The registration opens for October 24, not the 14th. Let me see. During this, ICE out of Ventura County will give a presentation during the Truth Act Forum. And then somebody's asking, planning to speak individually or as a group? There's a follow-up question to this. So let me ask that question again. So they're asking, plan to speak individually or as a group? Should folks forward their comments to ICE out of Ventura County to include that in the presentation? I think the goal here is to have everybody give their comments or their statements individually, because I believe the presentation is going to be done so separately. So I believe, to my understanding, if anybody does want to give any comment, please do so in person or do so via Zoom. And then,
I'm sorry,
yeah,
Lupita,
go
I'll
ahead.
just add definitely. So what's really great is, as I said, if there's ever any transfers or notifications, the next year there has to be this forum. So the sheriff does have to present. And then what's really great is the ICE Out of Ventura Coalition as a coalition does have its own presentation. So one speaker that will do their own PowerPoint. And then on top of that, what we really want is everyone here today and all of your friends to show up in force and to sign up by the 24th to give comment. Because the more of us in the public that are there, one by one, coming up and giving our comment, we're just adding to our presentation and showing where the community really is on this issue.
Thank you, Jehan, for clarifying. Is there any other questions to our presenters? While if anybody is typing in the moment, I did want to ask Bruno, I don't know if you were able to share the picture. I wasn't able to see the one at the Sacramento Immigrant Day of Action. So I don't know if anybody else was able to see it, but if you could share it, I would love to see it. Didn't get to see that group photo.
Yes, give me 1 minute.
Thank you. And then in the meantime, I do have a question that came through. I'm going to go ahead and share that with everybody.
Lupita, this photo?
Yes, thank you. I didn't see it, so I can see it now.
Oh, my apologies.
All right, I'm trying to copy and paste the question that I just got sent so I can share with everybody. Give me 1 second.
And then there's the question if the recording and slides would be shared.
Yes, they will be. So keep an eye out afterwards. We will be sending an email shortly after, within a few days, I believe, or a week after, with more resources as well with the recording. And then here, I want to share a question that was asked to everybody and then present it to whoever wants to go ahead and answer. And then I'll go ahead and just read it out loud. So, given that the sheriff and board of supervisors have so far not changed their policy on voluntary cooperating with ICE, what are some other ways we can support our undocumented community outside of the Truth Act Forum?
I have some suggestions, and I'm sure Bruno too, you have some. But I think continuing to stay engaged with your supervisors on this issue, so letting them know where you stand, um, especially if you hear of more examples of this. I think there's also what can be known as accompaniment. So either helping folks if they are unfortunately, in immigration proceedings, go to appointments or get the legal services they need. That's another idea of things that you could do. There's also just the community itself staying vigilant. And I think that would probably take some more organization. But sometimes there's where you can develop either community patrols where the community is actually watching to see if ICE is around, or even rapid response networks, but it would take some more organization. But yeah, I think definitely continuing to do what you all are doing and raising these issues to your elected officials is huge. And I'll pass it to Bruno or Lupita too if you have other ideas.
Thank you, Jehan. In the era of disinformation, misinformation, we know Trump, Republicans are lying about immigrants. And so I think regardless of who wins the election, a lot of people across California are talking about know your rights workshops. Again, I know many organizations did a lot of know your rights workshops during the first Trump administration and really informing our families and communities about their rights, staying silent against the police and ICE, how to protect yourself from ICE, how to decipher or distinguish what's a real warrant or not when ICE is at your door, right? And so I think partnerships with schools, I know Ventura County does a great swap meet justice, right? So it's going to be really important to meet our community members where they're at, churches, places of worship, to really provide that information and protect folks. Because let's be real, the threat of mass raids, detention, and deportation, a lot of folks are living in fear right now. And so what I think we can give folks is information and assurance that they have rights and how to defend themselves against ICE. So that's one thing on the local level. And then also really educating all county board of supervisors, local elected officials. In the era of Trump, what are our Ventura County officials doing to protect our family members? I know places have mixed conservative folks in power, but really finding those people who are going to be standing up for immigrants, educating them, inviting them to your events, going to their events, and really strengthening those partnerships. Because our local officials is one, not the only, line of defense. And we can really urge them to take action and find creative ways to support undocumented folks. DACA's ending is really concerning, right? A lot of what after November, what 2025 will look like. And so really protecting our folks is going to be, I think, a high priority.
And I'll add to, since people were raising it before, but Prop 36 looks also very bad, and it's going to have a lot of unfortunate consequences for the immigrant community too. So working to make sure that Prop 36 doesn't pass, or educating other folks on it, because there's a lot of money behind it right now too.
And then I guess I'll kind of just piggyback on what was being said just now.
Sí,
Another
y solo
ways we can
quiero
support is, knowledge is power.
resaltar lo que se acaba de
A lot of the
mencionar
times,
y pues
we don't
el
know
saber
how
es
to respond
poder,
to law
¿no?
enforcement or to
No
ICE,
sabemos cómo
even as
responder a
citizens or whatever
inmigración,
status you may
a
hold.
ICE,
So
sin
if
importar nuestro estado
you
migratorio.
attend
Entonces, el asistir a un taller, conocer tus derechos, ya sea por ti mismo o por familiares, es importante conocer tus derechos porque cada persona los tiene sin importar su estado migratorio. Definitivamente se trata de asistir talleres, seminarios web como estos. A menudo son gratis, ¿no? Entonces, correr la voz y, y proteger a las personas y ser voluntarios, ¿no? Donar, el detalle, esos detalles tienen gran impacto porque algunas personas acaban de llegar y cualquier muestra de apoyo significa bastante. Y voy a ver si hay una última pregunta. La voy a copiar y pegar y creo que de aquí vamos a terminar. La voy a pegar un momento.
Entonces la voy a leer en voz alta, la acabo de poner. Una última pregunta. ¿Ha estado la legislación de condado de Santuario presentada y ya se ha votado en ella en el condado de Ventura?
So yeah, we can see that someone
Podemos ver que alguien contestó que todavía no se ha presentado, entonces no está en ordenanza todavía. Probablemente he estado viendo los últimos 2 años, sí ha salido como una propuesta y muchas veces eh, la Junta de Supervisores lo ha hecho al consejo, que es como la abogada, dice, no, no podemos hacer nada si Sherry no quiere, y eso no es verdad. Muchas veces ya se ha hecho desde antes. Entonces, creo que luchar para demostrar que hay voluntad en la comunidad. eh, y también ha habido grupos eh, que han sucedido, pero ha habido grupos exploratorios que ha dado datos, recursos y otros beneficios de las políticas de santuario. Entonces debemos mostrarles que hay mucha voluntad de la comunidad.
All right, thank you so much. I believe that was our last question. So, again, everybody, just as a quick reminder, just keep an eye
Solo
out.
un recordatorio rápido, vean sus correos electrónicos que les van a estar llegando en la semana con recursos adicionales y una grabación también de este seminario web. Compártanlo para las personas que no pudieron venir o cualquier persona que crean que se beneficiaría de esto. Y también tenemos plataformas de redes sociales. Si quieren estar en contacto con nosotros, ver qué está sucediendo, estamos en Facebook, también en Instagram. Siéntanse libres de seguirnos e interactuar con nosotros y ver qué es lo que está sucediendo en nuestra comunidad. Entonces, con ello, me gustaría decir de nuevo muchas gracias a nuestros presentadores por estar aquí esta noche y dar esas presentaciones tan asombrosas. Y sí, muchas gracias.